All right. So um, today, welcome to week 5. This is going to be a run through of Genesis 1, 4 through 16. So this is creation and the fall. All right. So this is going to be a pretty close reading of the accounts here. So first, let me walk through the narrative. So we have creation account 1. This is the account in which God creates from a formless void. And it's all about God speaking and things happening. God speaks and creation is made. We have the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, so on. And God rests on the seventh day. Man and woman are created on the sixth day, and they're created at the same time. Chapter 2 of Genesis, we actually have another account of creation. So very early on, God creates man from the dust of the ground, breathes life into him, and the man becomes a living being. He places him in the Garden of Eden, gives him dominion over the animals there, and then eventually realizes it's not good for man to be alone. And so he puts him to sleep and makes a woman from his own rib. So this is Adam and Eve. Now, chapter 3 is when we start to get into sin and the fall and its punishment. So we have a serpent that emerges, and the serpent speaks to the woman. Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? And the serpent talks to her and convinces her that she will not die if she eats from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So when the woman saw that the tree was good, she takes from the fruit and starts to eat it, and she gives it to her husband, who was with her, and he also ate it. Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And what this leads into is a fractured relationship with God. So they had been close to God before, and now they're farther away. In some sense, they're farther away because they have a knowledge of the fact that they're naked. Because I was naked, I hid myself. All right. Then we have the punishment that's laid out on them. So they broke the commandment to not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And for punishment, the woman will have pain in childbearing, and the man will have to work in the garden or work in the world and till the ground, and it will be very hard labor. And they were kept away from the Garden of Eden by some angels. And finally, in chapter 4, we start to see the result of this fall. We have Cain and Abel, and Cain makes his offering, and it's not accepted by God, whereas Abel's offering is accepted. And God says to Cain, sensing that he's kind of angry about the fact that his sacrifice was not accepted, he says, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. And notice, this is the first mention of sin in all of these chapters. So it's the first time in all of this stuff that we actually have sin mentioned. And it's very poetic language. Sin is lurking at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. Despite having just heard this from God, Cain says to his brother Abel, let us go out into the field. And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, where is your brother Abel? And he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? Okay, so these are kind of famous words from the Bible. And what they imply is something like, uh, this is like a radical um, neglect of one's own brother. radical um, maliciousness. All right, and then God punishes Cain, and he says to him, "Listen, your brother's blood is crying out from the ground, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." All right, so Cain now becomes a wanderer, and he says to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. You have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face." So that idea of being hidden from the face of God is interesting here, um, because that's kind of what happens to Adam and Eve. When they sin, they're hidden. They hide themselves. So one way we might think about sin is hiding oneself from God. But another way we might think about sin is something like original death and the results from that death. So we live in a world that is fractured by sin. One of the questions that we're going to be asking ourselves is something like this. Um, what is original sin? How does it work? How does it affect us? All right. So a couple of things to note here. Um, First, in the creation accounts, the first creation account in particular, this was written during the time of the Babylonian exile, which was in the early 500s, something like 587 BCE. And it's actually sort of an apologetic text. It's a text that's meant to be kind of a cultural counter to the myths of the Babylonian people. Now, okay, these are myths, but they're true myths. Like they're not just stories, but they actually describe reality in a real way. And they have consequences for the way that we think about and the way we live, the way we think about reality and the way we live. Um, One idea that emerges from this in the later church, so it's not necessarily here straight in the text explicitly, but it emerges in the later church, is that God creates out of nothing merely by speaking. So the idea here is that this shows the greatness of God. God is great because he doesn't even need to, well, God is great because he can create just by speaking. And the Jewish scriptures actually use a particular word for God's creation, bara. This is a word that is used um, for when God creates. It is not used when human beings create. Because when human beings create things, they're kind of just taking something that's already there and then they use that and rebuild it. So human beings kind of reform matter. They don't create from nothing. And the idea here is that this language over here, this language is poetic. All right, so this is important to compare to the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, in which creation is made from the slain body of the mother god, Tiamat. So there are two gods at the beginning, and they have a lot of children gods. And basically, the children gods kind of revolt against the parents, and because the father gets upset at the children god's partying, basically they wake him up often. Long story short, one of the children rises up, Marduk, and kills Tiamat, the mother god. And from Tiamat, he makes the world. He makes the stars and he makes creation. Um, so Marduk rises up and slays Tiamat, and from her body makes all of creation. Creation. Creation, except for human beings. Okay, so human beings are made in the Genesis account, in this account over here, human beings in both accounts are made in God's image, right? So they're made in God's image. In the Enuma Elish, they're made from the body of a defeated. So Tiamat had an army general, and Marduk took the blood of that defeated general, and he created human beings. Marduk created human beings to do the work of the gods, so the gods didn't have to work. He created human beings as slaves. So in the Enuma Elish, we have slavery. We have slavery. In Genesis, we have dominion. Two very different concepts. It's a very different concept, too, to be made from God's blood versus being made in God's image. And in the second creation account, we have something even a little more intimate. We have God forming people from the clay with his hands and then breathing into them. So the main takeaway here is that creation is initially, creation is good. So it's the case that the fundamental orientation of creation is good. But it gets corrupted by the fall, the original death, original sin. Okay, now the reason I mention original death is that if you actually look at the story here, the punishment is death. If they eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the punishment is death. Okay. For out of the dust you were taken, and you are dust, and to dust you shall return. All right, so um, we have here the punishment of death. So death. All right. This is important because in the early church, we get this distinction between the East and the West, between the original death. So in the East, we have the original death, and following Augustine, we have original sin. And this is important because it helps us conceive of, it shapes how we conceive the work of sin. So what's going on with sin? What is it doing? Well, sin is an active force, and it's working on Cain to kill his brother. So it's something that he has to reject. But it's also something that makes him hide his face from God. Let's see. I shall be hidden from your face. So that's problematic, and we see that already with Adam and Eve. They hide themselves from God. And it also causes him to kill his brother. So it destroys it destroys any sense of sin and death, destroy any sense of original harmony or justice. Well, and it's not that they destroy any sense. It's they destroy the original harmony and justice. So that's still possible. It's just a lot harder now and probably only possible with God's grace. All right, so one last thing. Um, I think one of the more helpful ways to think about original sin is as think about the world as a network of relationships. Once one of the nodes in that network is damaged, then the whole network is compromised, and will probably continue to function suboptimally and be self-perpetuating in a bad way. Kind of like if you have an injury to your ankle and you start walking around on that, you're going to start moving your ankle in a way that's probably going to lead to further problems downstream and upstream of your body. You're probably going to have knee issues if you don't fix your ankle and you don't start walking correctly. Your knees and your calves and your hips might get thrown off by the fact that you're walking in a funny way. And then that starts to really accumulate as you walk more and more and more. All right, so anyways, I look forward to being with you guys, talking with you guys about this more. Um, and yeah, looking forward to see what you have to say. So see you soon.